From crime dramas to magic acts to 50 Shades of Grey, today's topic is known around the world, although there are restrictions in place depending on the country about how a person can be displayed with them. France, for example, prohibits the media from showing pictures of people with them until they've been convicted. Those being restrained with the device in Hong Kong are offered head coverings for anonymity. And in Japan, a person's hands may be blurred in photographs if they are wearing them. Normally, when I have to make a disclaimer for episodes, they involve content that may not be suitable for all ages. But this episode's disclaimer is a bit different, so here it goes. The content you're about to hear is intended for educational purposes. The Story Behind does not endorse any use of this information to evade law enforcement or commit illegal acts. Are you intrigued yet? I'm your host, Emily Prokop, and this is the Story Behind Handcuffs. But first, a quick message. I've talked before about my side project called Podcast Share, and last week I had a lot of fun kicking it off. Podcast Share is a Twitter account that is taken over every week by a different curator to kind of live tweet what podcasts they're listening to. Most of the curators I have scheduled are hosts of other podcasts, and some are listeners who really enjoy podcasts and want to share what they listen to. It's a really fun project, and I hope you'll join me in checking it out by following Podcast Share on Twitter or going to the website podcastshare.net. Before we get into the actual handcuffs, let's take a look at the word. It might sound pretty cut and dry, the word hand with the word cuff, as in cuff on a sleeve. But there's an even earlier origin of it. The word was originally handcop, hand having the obvious meaning, but did you ever wonder why we call policemen cops sometimes? It's a misconception that cop is an acronym for citizen or constable on patrol, or that they were called cops because their badges or buttons were made from copper. The word cop comes from the Latin capere, meaning capture. It's related to the French word capper, meaning to seize. In fact, it's believed the origins of the word cop is actually a shortening of the word handcop. Most historians believe the first cuffs were made of rope or animal hide. However, as more metals were discovered, they were used to make handcuffs, even though those were more like shackles, and metals at the time were brittle, easily malleable, and broken out of. Restraining someone by the wrist to deter them from escape isn't a modern practice. In fact, one of the earliest recordings of it was during the Augustan period. The poet Virgil recounted the myth of Proteus, who possessed the gift of prophecy, but he didn't share his knowledge. He was able to shapeshift at will, and it was said he would only reveal his knowledge if captured, which made it difficult to do so since he could transform himself into anything he wanted. Aristaeus, one of Apollo's sons, finally used handcuffs on him to constrain him in order to find out why his bees were dying. But even earlier than that, handcuffs were used in the Greco-Punic Wars, and it was said Carthaginians would bring chariots of handcuffs to battle the Greeks as early as 600 BC, with the intention of taking prisoners after conquering them. Now, there's a great movie sequel name, Chariots of Handcuffs, right? As handcuffs evolved, the problem with sizing them continued. If the person in custody had big wrists, they wouldn't close, and someone with smaller wrists could easily escape. In 1862, W.V. Adams patented the first adjustable ratchet design. This allowed cuffs to use a small, adjustable locking mechanism. The design was later used by Orson C. Phelps and the Tower Company, which became the standard until World War II. But even though handcuffs were now adjustable, they were still cumbersome to use, weighing in at about a pound and requiring a screw key. There were a number of others designed, some used as a means of torture, like the twister, which was able to be tightened severely to cause pain, or the French version, le cabriolet, which used piano wire instead of chain. But in 1912, George Carney invented what is the basis for the more modern handcuffs we know today, known as the swing cuff. This design featured what's known as a single strand on half of each cuff and a double strand, which the single strand could swing through if there weren't any wrists in place, which kept the police from accidentally closing their handcuffs and locking them. But did you notice what year that was? 1912. The same year the Titanic sank. And if you remember from the 1997 movie Titanic, Leonardo DiCaprio's character Jack was bound in handcuffs at one point. But these weren't the newer swing cuffs. They were common English Hyatt Darby handcuffs Type 104, according to forums dedicated to handcuff collecting. Yep, you never know where research will lead you. But according to these forums, there's a goof in the movie. You can tell these handcuffs are replicas, probably using the same die-cast mold, but the key gives them away as reproductions. The original key would have had an oval head, while the ones used in the movie has a flat top and was checkered, a characteristic notable for being a replica. 2 years after swing handcuffs were patented, the company Peerless created double lock cuffs, which, as you can imagine, was a way to safeguard against nerve damage in the wrists caused by the single lock cuffs. The double lock cuffs could neither tighten nor loosen, but it also kept escaping to a minimum. But those who could escape were able to make a good living as street performers and magicians. Handcuffs became standardized, and it was common for a number of handcuffs to be opened with a universal key. This helped those looking to escape if they happened to be carrying that key. But as different handcuffs emerged, different keys were needed. Harry Houdini was known as a master of escaping any sort of constraint placed on him, including, and especially, handcuffs. His collection of keys and lockpicks, which he was known to keep in pouches all over his body, sold in an auction for $14,000. Not only did he keep these keys in pouches, but after he lost a few teeth as a child, he had a mouth plate that held a hidden compartment that some believe he used to hide more lockpicking devices and keys. And he was also able to swallow small objects and regurgitate them at will, which, you can imagine, he did with keys, if the rumors are to be believed. But if you're not Houdini and have a secret compartment in a mouth plate or dozens of tiny pouches full of escape tools, what do you do if you find yourself handcuffed against your will? Houdini made use of his body, and in particular, the small size of it. He was able to shimmy like an eel out of straitjackets, for example, and he could do this with handcuffs as well. Houdini is also said to be so good at knowing locks inside and out, he could picture the inner workings of them as he used everything in his power to escape. And he made picking the lock look easy, as if they were fake, when in fact the handcuffs and constraints he was put into were real. Going back to the movie Titanic, there's also the strategy of snapping the handcuffs, which is shown in the movie. And it's not only painful when done in the wrong way, but also causes harm when done the correct way. Magicians use a different set of skills to escape handcuffs. Sometimes they may have an audience member put the handcuffs on, not revealing they've pulled part of their sleeve down, or they could be wearing a wrist apparatus. But both of these require an audience member who isn't looking for details, or a plan. Another method is to coat the wrist in a lubricant like butter or oil, and if handcuffs aren't willingly provided by an audience member, the magician may just happen to have a set of handcuffs available for use. Trick handcuffs could be opened using a key or a snap or Velcro, but some are even molded out of sugar, known as bridge jumpers, since they would easily dissolve in water should a magician decide to escape from handcuffs after jumping off a bridge. Information for this episode was sourced from United Locksmith, Mallusion.com, the documentary Houdini Unlocking the Mysteries, and more links which can be found in the show notes at thestorybehindpodcast.com. This episode was brought to you by the Story Behind executive producers who support the show through the Patreon page at patreon.com/thestorybehind. Stargate Pioneer from GonnaGeek.com, Matt from The One Word Go Show, Linguist Sam, Diane and Denise from History Goes Bump, Scott Smith from Recovering from Religion, Dan Brennick from Netflix and Swell, Jared Dunham from thehistoryfile.net, Heather Welch from Sunshine and Power Cuts, Jason Bryant from Matt Talk Online, Gerald and Andy from Two Peas on a Podcast, Bandrew Scott from the Bandrew Says Podcast and Podcastage YouTube channel, Adam from Everyone Has a Podcast, and newest executive producers, Barry G. and Nick and Justin from Epic Film Guys. Thanks for listening. Those being restrained with the device in Hong Kong are offered head coverings for anonymity. Whoa. Are offered head coverings for anonymity. Are offered head cover. Why? Anonymity. Anonymity. Why did I write this word?